on the ground, and this is what we would like to see our government talking about.
I think we'll just looking from an environmental perspective, one of the biggest issues is how we're getting our food. And right now there's this, there's this big push for, large corporations to kind of monopolize the food supply from seeds, from, to the huge systems of monocrops and stuff like that. So, and one of the biggest problems with that is that the larger the corporation, the less directly linked they are to the people who are affected by their actions. So one of the biggest things is just letting the grassroots movements that are kind of, figuring out how they can support sustainable agriculture, but letting them do the work that they're trying to do and, pushing the corporations aside.
I would focus a bit more on the issue of access to safe abortion, because it seems like our administration is not willing to put that on the table at all. And to me, it seems like contradictory if you say that you're committed to maternal health worldwide, and yet you're not acknowledging that 70,000 or more women die each year of unsafe abortion. Of course, safe sex education, access to contraception and all that stuff is completely important to lower the number of abortion, but at the same time, we all know that there are cultural stigmas, and men who don't want to use condoms, women who never even heard of birth control, don't have access to birth control, and of course the failure of contraception as well, and not to mention rape and gender violence. So just because the topic of abortion is controversial, you can't take that off the table and say you're committed to maternal health, because those deaths are still occurring. And again, like, you can't say you're committed to maternal health and yet not support the International Planned Parenthood funding, which is in process of not being reinstated this year.
But I think one of the big emerging issues is going to be the issue of older people in our society, and how we're going to care for them. In 2009, worldwide, there were 516 million people over the age of 60. And by 2050, that number is going to be 1.53 million. Of that group, 1 in 3 will have some level of disability and probably some level of dementia. So I think we're at a point in the world where we, in Saskatchewan, if we want to sort of think globally and act locally, we have the ability to lead in this area, to make change, and I think it's our responsibility to do that. I also really believe that as the resources shrink, that older people and people with disabilities are going to be under extreme pressure, as are their families, to find resources to care for themselves.
Well, I think the first message to the G8 would be that climate change is not a sideshow. It has to be central to discussion of most of the other major issues that the world is dealing with, because climate change is the impacts of unrestricted climate change are going to make everything else much worse. We're looking at sea level rise that will turn millions of people into environmental refugees. There are going to be large areas of coastal lands that will be flooded and uninhabitable. We're looking at increased droughts in major areas. So there are going to be real problems with food production. So this is a huge issue that can only be approached globally, because it's one of those issues where the impact of the bad behavior is felt thousands of miles probably from where the behavior took place. So it has to be dealt with on a global level, and the G8 and the G20 seem to have become the world's new steering committee. So it has to be included as a major issue.
I think in the last 60 years, there's been some very careful socialization that has led to this sort of unquestioning support of capitalism, unquestioning support of our consumption patterns, unquestioning support of how countries, and when we talk about developing countries, I'm always uncomfortable with that word because I don't want to see them develop into industrialized countries. I would like to see us unindustrialized and decolonized rather than call them developing in terms of, well, they need to develop into our model. And the truth is, most organizations, most countries in the G8, and even the IMF and World Bank, they don't want them to develop into industrialized countries anyway. They want to keep them exactly as they are so they can continue to pull resources from them and not have them have real, I don't know that there's a real democracy anywhere anyway, but not have them have democratic countries because then they wouldn't be able to continue to use them as they do now to feed our own wealth.
I will take to the table a challenging task, which is looking at the global financial architecture and global financial governance through women's eyes, through social activist perspective, through human rights perspective, and totally undo it and rebuild a system which is caring, a system which does not create the huge disparities between the rich and poor. And all of you know that in the current context, there were always disparities, but the disparities between the rich countries and poor countries, rich regions and poor regions, rich people and poor regions, have escalated to the extent which is absolutely immoral, indecent, as well as unthinkable. And that is the project of this kind of global financial architecture, including IMF, including World Bank, supported by the World Trade Organization. That is, I call it, that's the institutional mechanism to implement the agenda of these financial institutions. All the regional development banks, all the financial institutions are part of this structure, and they come up with one single mono ideology which is working for profit, ignoring this social responsibility.
And I believe that education really has to be part of the call for change, because the youth are the ones that are going to inherit, the toxic sludge in the Gulf of Mexico. And if the students and if the young are not, if they don't understand their role in society to really create a much better world than the adults have left them with, then we will be in a sorry mess. And we have to give the youth hope. What we're finding in our, particularly our First Nations community, is anger, is apathy, is really probably the finest example of how not to treat the humanity that we have here. We have very high suicide rates, we have gang activity, we have housing crises, we have water crises, we have human rights abuses, we have the whole gamut. So as a First Nations woman, I have a duty, bonus to my community, but not only to my community, to the community that we share with our non-Indigenous sisters and brothers, that they must be part of the solution, and education must be definitely a part of that.